The digital clock on the emergency room wall read 5:47:23 a.m. when the massive German Shepherd burst through the automatic doors of Heartland Memorial Hospital, something precious cradled in his powerful jaws. Security alarms shrieked as the 85-pound dog charged past the reception desk, his amber eyes wild with desperate purpose. Sarah May Henderson, head nurse for 15 years, had seen everything walk through those doors, but never a battle-scarred shepherd carrying what appeared to be a bundled blanket like his life depended on it. "Get that animal out of here!" shouted Jenny, the young night nurse, grabbing a broom from behind the counter. But Sarah's weathered hands stayed the younger woman's arm. Something in the dog's bearing, the precise way he moved despite his obvious limp, the intelligence burning in those haunted eyes, reminded her of another soldier she'd once known. The shepherd approached slowly, deliberately, then gently placed his burden on the sterile floor. As he stepped back with military precision, Sarah's breath caught. Inside the torn blanket was a newborn baby, skin blue with cold, barely breathing. "Sometimes the good Lord sends angels with 4 legs and a warrior's heart," she whispered, reaching for the phone to call pediatrics. The clock read 5:47:56. Time was running out. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The clock's red digits burned into Sarah's vision. 5:48, 45, 5:49, 12. Each second that ticked by felt like a lifetime as she knelt beside the tiny bundle on the cold hospital floor. "Dear God," she breathed, her experienced hands immediately checking the infant's vitals. The baby's lips were tinged blue, breathing shallow and irregular. This child couldn't be more than 3 days old, and exposure to the cool Nebraska morning had pushed the little one to the edge of hypothermia. Jenny backed away, still clutching her broom like a weapon. "Sarah, we need to call animal control. That dog could be rabid, dangerous." "Hush now," Sarah commanded, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in emergency medicine. She looked up at the German shepherd, who stood at perfect attention, watching every move she made with those intelligent amber eyes. There was nothing wild or rabid about this animal. This was a trained dog, a working dog, and something deep in Sarah's heart recognized the look of a soldier following orders. The shepherd's coat was matted and dirty, speaking of months on the streets, but his posture remained proud, disciplined. A faded military-style collar hung loose around his thick neck, and Sarah could just make out what looked like worn lettering on a metal tag. "Look at him, Jenny," Sarah said softly, never taking her eyes off the dog. "He's not aggressive. He brought this baby here for help. Don't judge a book by its cover, child." As if understanding her words, the shepherd took another step back, giving Sarah full access to the infant while maintaining his vigilant watch. His scarred muzzle bore testament to battles fought and won, and the slight favor he showed his left hind leg suggested old wounds that had never properly healed. The baby stirred weakly in Sarah's arms, a tiny whimper escaping blue lips. Sarah's heart clenched. She'd seen enough newborns to know this one was fighting for every breath. "Call Dr. Morrison," she instructed Jenny, wrapping the baby in her own sweater. "Tell her we have a critical infant emergency, possible exposure and hypothermia." The clock read 5:51:33 as footsteps echoed down the corridor. Dr. Patricia Morrison appeared, her usually pristine appearance slightly disheveled, as if she'd dressed in haste. Something flickered across her face when she saw the scene: the dog, the baby, Sarah kneeling on the floor. But it passed so quickly Sarah almost missed it. "Where did this infant come from?" Dr. Morrison asked, her voice oddly strained. "This brave boy brought her in," Sarah replied, nodding toward the shepherd. "Still waters run deep, Pat. Sometimes help comes in forms we don't expect." The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, the first sign of anything approaching contentment Sarah had seen from him. But Dr. Morrison was already reaching for the baby, her movements just a little too urgent, her eyes just a little too bright. The clock read 5:52:17. Something wasn't right here. Sarah's fingers traced the worn leather of the German Shepherd's collar, and her breath caught as she made out the faded engraving, Max, property of Sergeant W. Whitmore. The name hit her like a physical blow, transporting her back 14 months to a night she'd tried so hard to forget. October 15th, 2022, 11:47 p.m. The ambulance bay doors had burst open with the same urgency she'd witnessed this morning, but instead of a dog, paramedics had rushed in a young soldier, his desert camouflage soaked with blood. Staff Sergeant William Bill Whitmore, 29 years old, multiple gunshot wounds sustained in a training accident at the nearby Fort Harrison. Sarah had been the lead nurse on duty that night, and she'd worked frantically alongside Dr. Morrison to save the young man's life. But even as they'd pumped blood into his failing system, even as they'd fought to restart his heart, Bill's fevered words had haunted the trauma bay. "Emma, where's Emma?" he'd gasped, his hand clutching Sarah's scrubs with desperate strength. "My baby girl. Jessica died having her. Emma's all I got left." Sarah had tried to calm him, to focus his attention on breathing, on fighting. But Bill's delirium had only intensified as his condition worsened. "Max," he'd whispered, tears streaming down his dirt-streaked face. "Max is waiting. He'll protect Emma. Promised Jessica. Promised I'd take care of our baby girl." "Sir, you need to save your strength," Sarah had urged, but Bill's grip on her hand had tightened with the desperation of a drowning man. "Find Emma," he'd begged, his voice growing weaker with each word. "She's in the system. Social services. They took her when Jessica died in childbirth. Said I wasn't stable. Deployment. But I'm back now. I'm back for her." Those had been among his last coherent words. Bill Whitmore had died at 3:22 a.m. on October 16th, alone except for the medical staff who'd failed to save him. Sarah had held his hand as the monitors flatlined, had whispered the Lord's Prayer as his soul departed for whatever lay beyond. But what had haunted her most was what happened next. For 3 days after Bill's death, a German Shepherd had maintained vigil outside the hospital. The dog had refused food from well-meaning staff, had turned away from animal control officers, had simply sat by the main entrance as if waiting for someone who would never return. Sarah had taken to bringing the dog scraps from the cafeteria, leaving them just close enough that he might eat if he chose. She'd named him Max in her mind, though she'd never had the courage to approach him directly. Something about his profound grief, his unwavering loyalty to a master who could never come home, had broken her heart in ways she hadn't experienced since losing her own husband, Robert, to an IED in Iraq. On the 4th day, Max had simply vanished. Sarah had assumed he'd finally accepted reality and moved on. She'd never imagined he'd spent the last 14 months surviving on the streets, carrying the weight of a promise he couldn't fulfill. Present, 5:54:17 a.m. "Sarah," Dr. Morrison's sharp voice cut through the memory. "I asked you a question. Where exactly did this infant come from?" Sarah blinked, refocusing on the present moment. Dr. Morrison stood holding the baby with what seemed like unnecessary haste, her usually calm demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "Max brought her in," Sarah replied, studying her colleague's face. "Found her somewhere, by the looks of it. She's hypothermic, probably been exposed for hours." "Max?" Morrison's voice pitched higher. "You've named the animal?" "That's his name," Sarah said quietly, pointing to the collar. "This is Bill Whitmore's dog. Remember Bill? The soldier who died here 14 months ago?" The color drained from Morrison's face so quickly, Sarah thought she might faint. The baby in Morrison's arms stirred weakly, letting out a cry so soft it was barely audible. "We need to get her to the NICU immediately," Morrison said, but her voice sounded strained, almost strangled. "This infant is in critical condition." Sarah watched as Morrison hurried toward the elevator with the baby, but something nagged at her consciousness. In all her years working with Pat Morrison, she'd never seen the pediatrician lose her composure like this. Pat was known for her ice-cold professionalism, her ability to remain calm in any crisis. Max whined softly, a sound so filled with anguish it made Sarah's chest tighten. He'd positioned himself near the elevator, his amber eyes tracking Morrison's every movement. When the elevator doors closed, separating him from the baby he'd fought so hard to save, he let out a low howl that seemed to echo through the empty corridors. "Easy, boy," Sarah murmured, approaching Max slowly. For the first time, she reached out to touch him, half expecting him to pull away. Instead, Max pressed his scarred muzzle into her palm, and she felt the dampness of tears, or maybe that was her own eyes betraying her. "You remember this place, don't you?" she whispered. "You remember waiting for Bill. You remember when he never came home." Max's tail gave the faintest wag, and Sarah felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just a stray dog who'd found an abandoned baby. This was a soldier's companion, a creature who understood loss and loyalty in ways most humans never would. But as she knelt there in the empty lobby, stroking Max's matted fur, fragments of Bill's final words began assembling themselves into a horrifying possibility. "Emma, my baby girl. Jessica died having her. They took her when Jessica died. Said I wasn't stable." Sarah's blood ran cold as the implications crashed over her. She'd assumed Bill's talk about a daughter had been delirium, the fevered ramblings of a dying man. But what if it hadn't been? What if somewhere in the Nebraska social services system there really was a baby girl named Emma Whitmore? And what if Max, with the unerring instincts of a trained military dog, had somehow found her? "Sweet Jesus," Sarah breathed, her hand stilling on Max's head. "That baby, could she be?" Max looked up at her with those intelligent amber eyes, and Sarah could swear she saw understanding there. Understanding, and a desperate plea for help. "The truth has a way of finding the light," her grandmother used to say. "And sometimes it takes a four-legged angel to shine that light in all the right places." Sarah glanced at the clock. 5:57:22. Dr. Morrison had been unusually quick to whisk the baby away, unusually nervous about Max's presence, unusually flustered by the mention of Bill Whitmore's name. Her daddy had always told her that when someone was sweating in winter, they were hiding something hot. And right now, despite the cool morning air, Dr. Patricia Morrison had been sweating bullets. Max rose to his feet, his posture alert and determined. He padded toward the hospital's main corridor, then looked back at Sarah as if asking her to follow. "You want to show me something, don't you, boy?" Sarah asked. Max's tail wagged once, firmly, and he began walking toward the administrative wing with the purposeful gait of a dog on a mission. Sarah followed, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. "God's timing is perfect timing," she reminded herself. Maybe, just maybe, Max had been sent here for a reason bigger than either of them understood. Maybe Bill Whitmore's final promise was about to be kept, 14 months too late but not a moment too soon. The clock read 6:33 as they disappeared down the corridor, two unlikely partners united by love for a soldier who'd died believing he'd failed the people who mattered most. Behind them, the empty lobby held only the echo of their footsteps, and the quiet hum of a building where miracles and heartbreak walked hand in hand, separated by the thinnest of lines. The clock on the administrative wing wall glowed 5:55:43 as Sarah followed Max down the eerily quiet corridor. Less than 6 hours until the day shift change, when records would be filed, reports submitted, and evidence of whatever was happening here might disappear forever. Max moved with the focused intensity of a bloodhound on a trail, his scarred nose leading him past empty offices and darkened conference rooms. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she broke every protocol she'd followed for 15 years. Nurses didn't abandon their posts. Nurses didn't follow stray dogs into restricted areas. Nurses certainly didn't investigate their colleagues based on nothing more than a gut feeling and a dog's instincts. But Bobby would have followed his gut, she reminded herself, thinking of her late husband's countless stories about trusting intuition in combat zones. Robert Henderson had always said that the soldiers who came home were the ones who listened to that little voice telling them something wasn't right. Max stopped abruptly outside the records room, his body going rigid with alertness. The door stood slightly ajar, which was unusual. Hospital policy required all administrative areas to remain locked after hours. Sarah's pulse quickened as Max pushed his nose against the door, widening the gap just enough for them to slip inside. The records room smelled of paper and industrial disinfectant, row upon row of filing cabinets stretching toward the back wall. Max padded directly to a specific cabinet in the pediatric section, his behavior so purposeful it took Sarah's breath away. This wasn't random searching. This was a trained animal following a specific scent trail. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible in the tomb-like silence. Max sat in front of the cabinet marked WZ Pediatric, current year, and let out a soft whine. His amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that made her skin prickle with goosebumps. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened the drawer. The files were organized alphabetically, and it didn't take long to find what made her blood freeze in her veins. Whitmore, Emma Grace, DOB, 3 days ago. Status, deceased. The file was thin, containing only basic birth information and a death certificate signed by Dr. Patricia Morrison. According to the paperwork, baby Whitmore had died of complications related to premature birth, despite being born at full term, according to the medical notes. The inconsistencies jumped out at Sarah like neon signs in the darkness. But what made her legs nearly buckle was the photograph clipped to the inside cover. The baby in the picture was clearly healthy, clearly full term, with a distinctive birthmark on her left wrist, a small star-shaped mark that Sarah now remembered seeing on the infant Max had brought in. "Sweet Mother of God," she breathed, her hands shaking as she flipped through the sparse documentation. "She's supposed to be dead." The sound of footsteps in the corridor made both Sarah and Max freeze. Dr. Morrison's voice carried through the partially open door, sharp with irritation. "I don't care what time it is. I need those papers processed immediately. The transport arrives at noon, and everything needs to be in order." Sarah's blood turned to ice water. Transport? What transport? She pressed herself against the filing cabinet, Max instinctively moving to shield her from view. "Sarah, what are you doing in here?" Dr. Morrison stood in the doorway, her usually immaculate appearance even more disheveled than before. Her lab coat bore stains Sarah hadn't noticed earlier, and there was something wild in her eyes that set every alarm bell in Sarah's head ringing at full volume. I was looking for information about the baby," Sarah stammered, clutching Emma's file behind her back. "Max seemed to know something about her, and I thought—" "You thought wrong." Morrison's voice cut like a scalpel. "That infant is a foundling, probably abandoned by some teenage mother who couldn't handle the responsibility. We've done everything we can for her, but some cases are beyond our help." Sarah felt Max's warm body press against her legs, offering silent support. The dog's presence gave her courage she didn't know she possessed. "Her name is Emma," Sarah said quietly. "Emma Grace Whitmore. She's Bill Whitmore's daughter." The color drained from Morrison's face so rapidly that Sarah thought she might collapse. For a long moment, the only sound in the records room was the distant hum of the hospital's ventilation system and the faint tick of the wall clock. That's impossible," Morrison whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "The Whitmore baby died. I signed the death certificate myself." "Did she?" Sarah stepped forward, Max moving with her like a trained partner. "Or did you sign papers saying she died when she was actually very much alive?" Morrison's laugh sounded forced, brittle. Sarah, you're talking nonsense. The stress of this situation has obviously affected your judgment. You should go home. Get some rest. Why are you sweating, Pat? Sarah interrupted, remembering her father's old saying. It's barely 60 degrees in here, but you're sweating like it's the middle of July. What are you hiding? Max growled low in his throat, the first sign of aggression he'd shown since entering the hospital. But his attention wasn't focused on Sarah. It was locked on Morrison with laser-like intensity. I don't have to explain myself to a nurse, Morrison snapped, but her hands were shaking as she spoke. That dog needs to be removed from the premises immediately, and you need to return to your duties before I'm forced to write you up for abandoning your post. Sarah felt the weight of Emma's file in her hands, the evidence of lies and deception that went deeper than she'd imagined. The clock on the wall read 6:01:22, time slipping away like sand through an hourglass. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me the truth about Emma Whitmore, Sarah said, surprised by the steel in her own voice. That baby upstairs is Bill's daughter, isn't she? The daughter he died thinking he'd never see again. Morrison's facade cracked like thin ice under pressure. You don't understand what you're interfering with, Sarah. There are procedures, protocols, legal considerations. Legal considerations? Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. You filed a false death certificate for a healthy baby. You told a dying soldier his daughter was beyond his reach when she was alive and needed him. What part of that follows legal protocol? Max moved closer to Morrison, his military training evident in every line of his powerful body. He wasn't threatening, but his message was clear. He was prepared to protect Sarah and, by extension, Emma. Morrison backed toward the door, her movements jerky with panic. You're making a terrible mistake, Sarah. Some things are bigger than what we can see from our limited perspective. That baby will have opportunities, advantages. With her family, Sarah finished firmly. With people who loved her father and would love her. Her father is dead. Morrison's composure finally shattered completely. Dead soldiers can't raise children. Dead soldiers can't provide college funds and private schools and all the advantages wealth can offer. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sarah felt Max's body tense beside her, felt her own world tilt on its axis as the implications crashed over her. You sold her, Sarah whispered, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. You sold Bill Whitmore's baby. Morrison's silence was answer enough. The clock read 6:05:17 as Sarah made the most important decision of her career. Sometimes you gotta do what's right, not what's easy, her grandmother had always said. And right now, easy would be walking away, pretending she'd never seen Emma's file, never noticed the inconsistencies. But Bill Whitmore had died believing his daughter was lost forever. And Max had spent 14 months searching for a promise he couldn't abandon. Sarah Henderson had never been one to choose easy over right. Max, she said quietly, I think we need to find Emma. Right now, the clock read 6:02:15 when Sarah's trembling fingers traced the edge of Emma's photograph, and suddenly the world shifted beneath her feet like tectonic plates realigning. The baby in the picture had a distinctive birthmark on her tiny left wrist, a perfect star-shaped mark that seemed to glow against her pale skin. Sarah's breath caught as a memory surfaced with crystalline clarity. Bill Whitmore, delirious with pain and blood loss, rolling up his sleeve in the trauma bay to show her something he'd considered more precious than his own life. Look, he'd gasped, his voice barely a whisper as the monitors beeped frantically around them. Emma, she'll have this too. Jessica said it runs in families. There, tattooed on Bill's left forearm in the exact same location as the baby's birthmark, had been a small star. Not a military insignia or a symbol of patriotism, but something far more personal, a constellation of freckles he'd been born with, turned into permanent ink to honor the family connection he'd hoped to share with his daughter. "Sweet Jesus," Sarah breathed, her knees nearly buckling as the full weight of recognition crashed over her. "This is Bill's baby. This is Emma." Max's tail began wagging with an intensity that made his entire body vibrate. For the first time since entering the hospital, genuine joy flickered in his amber eyes. He knew. Somehow, through scent or instinct, or the mysterious bond between soldier and working dog, Max had known all along. Sarah's vision blurred with tears as she thought about the cruel irony of it all. Bill Whitmore had died believing his daughter was lost in the system, unreachable and beyond his protection. He'd spent his final moments begging Sarah to find Emma, never knowing that his beloved companion would one day accomplish what he couldn't. "I let him die thinking his baby was gone," she whispered to Max, who pressed his warm body against her legs in silent comfort. "We had his daughter all along, and nobody knew. Nobody cared enough to look." The sound of Dr. Morrison's voice in the corridor snapped Sarah back to the present danger. The clock showed 6:05:33, precious minutes slipping away while Emma remained in Morrison's custody, vulnerable and unprotected. "I need those transfer papers completed within the hour," Morrison was saying into her cell phone, her voice carrying the sharp edge of barely controlled panic. "Yes, I understand the timeline is accelerated, but circumstances have changed. There's a dog, and one of the nurses is asking questions." Sarah's blood turned to ice. Transfer papers. Morrison was moving Emma somewhere, and soon. Max's ears had pricked forward, his military training allowing him to detect sounds Sarah couldn't hear. His low growl suggested he understood the threat as clearly as she did. Working quickly, Sarah photographed Emma's file with her phone, capturing every page of false documentation. The adoption paperwork revealed payments of $50,000 to something called Blessed Beginnings Family Services, an organization Sarah had never heard of despite 15 years in pediatric care. "Max, we need to find Emma right now," she whispered urgently. But as they prepared to leave the records room, Max suddenly froze, his body going rigid with the alertness of a soldier detecting enemy movement. Through the partially open door, Sarah could see Dr. Morrison approaching with 2 security guards, their expressions grim and purposeful. "She's in there," Morrison was saying. "Nurse Henderson has become unstable. I'm concerned she may pose a danger to herself and others." The stress of the situation seems to have triggered some kind of breakdown. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the trap closing around them. Morrison was painting her as mentally unstable, creating a narrative that would discredit anything she might say about Emma's true identity. Max moved with the fluid precision of his military training, positioning himself between Sarah and the door while maintaining perfect silence. His amber eyes met hers, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Not just loyalty, but strategic intelligence. This dog had been trained to protect and extract, and right now, Sarah was his mission. The footsteps stopped just outside the records room. Sarah pressed herself against the back wall, clutching Emma's file to her chest like a shield. "Sarah?" Morrison's voice carried false concern. "Are you in there? We're worried about you." Max's muscles coiled like springs, ready to react to whatever came next. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the same focused intensity Bill must have relied on in combat zones around the world. "Nobody needs to get hurt here," one of the security guards called out. "Just come out slowly and we can talk about this." Sarah's mind raced through her options. The administrative wing had only one exit, and Morrison had effectively blocked their escape route. Even if she could somehow slip past the guards, Morrison would simply claim she'd suffered a mental breakdown, discrediting her testimony about Emma. But as despair began to settle over her like a heavy blanket, Max began moving with deliberate purpose. He padded to the back of the records room, sniffing along the wall until he found what he was looking for. A service door Sarah had never noticed, partially hidden behind a tall filing cabinet. The door was unlocked, leading to a maintenance corridor that connected the administrative wing to the rest of the hospital. Max looked back at Sarah with unmistakable intelligence, his message clear. This way out. The room's empty, she heard one of the guards telling Morrison. Maybe she went back to the main floor. Check everywhere, Morrison snapped. That woman has information that could cause serious problems. Find her before she talks to anyone else. Sarah slipped through the service door behind Max, her heart pounding as they navigated the narrow maintenance corridor. The space smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and old concrete, but it represented freedom from Morrison's trap. As they moved through the building's hidden arteries, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. The number was blocked, but the content made her blood freeze. Stop asking questions about Emma Whitmore. Some secrets are worth more than your career. Final warning. Max paused in the corridor, sensing her distress. When Sarah showed him the phone screen, his lips pulled back in a silent snarl that revealed teeth capable of serious damage. "They're threatening us, boy," Sarah whispered. "But that just means we're getting close to something they don't want us to find." The maintenance corridor led to a service elevator that would take them directly to the NICU where Emma was being held. As they waited for the elevator to arrive, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Cedar Ridge Police. "Miss Henderson?" The voice was professional but concerned. "This is Sergeant Martinez with Cedar Ridge PD. We've received a report that you may be experiencing a mental health crisis. Dr. Morrison is concerned for your safety." Sarah's world tilted as she realized how completely Morrison had outmaneuvered her. By involving the police, Morrison had created an official record of Sarah's supposed instability. Anything Sarah said now would be filtered through the lens of mental illness. "Sergeant, I'm perfectly fine," Sarah said carefully. "I'm investigating irregularities in patient records and I believe, ma'am, I'm going to need you to return to the main lobby immediately. Dr. Morrison and our crisis counselor are waiting to help you through this difficult time." The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and Max immediately stepped inside. His amber eyes fixed on Sarah's face with unwavering determination. This dog had spent 14 months searching for Emma, had endured rejection and starvation and endless lonely nights, all to honor a promise made to his fallen handler. He wasn't going to give up now, and neither could she. "Sergeant," Sarah said, stepping into the elevator beside Max. "I'll be down in just a few minutes. I need to check on a patient first." She ended the call before he could respond, knowing she'd just made herself a fugitive in her own hospital. The clock on the elevator showed 6:12:33, less than 5.5 hours before the day shift change would bring fresh personnel and potential witnesses to whatever Morrison was planning. As the elevator rose toward the NICU, Sarah felt the weight of Bill Whitmore's dying words, Max's unwavering loyalty, and Emma's innocent vulnerability pressing down on her shoulders. Sometimes you gotta do what's right, not what's easy. The elevator doors opened, and Sarah Henderson stepped into the fight of her life. The NICU floor was eerily quiet at 6:15:22 as Sarah and Max emerged from the service elevator. The soft beeping of monitors created a rhythmic soundtrack to their desperate mission, each electronic heartbeat marking precious seconds, slipping away like sand through an hourglass. Max's nose immediately went to work, his military training evident in the systematic way he processed the complex array of hospital scents. Within moments, he'd locked onto a trail and began moving with the focused intensity of a bloodhound on a mission. Sarah followed, her heart hammering against her ribs as fragments of memory began assembling themselves into a horrifying mosaic of deception. 3 months ago, March 15th, 2023. The flashback hit her with stunning clarity. She'd been working the night shift when another foundling had been brought in, a healthy baby boy found abandoned behind the Walmart on Highway 30. Dr. Morrison had taken charge of the case with unusual personal involvement, handling all the paperwork herself instead of delegating to the social workers. The baby had been placed in foster care within 48 hours, an unusually rapid timeline that had struck Sarah as odd at the time. Most abandoned infants spent weeks in the system while authorities searched for family members and completed background checks on potential placements. But Sarah had been dealing with her own grief then, the second anniversary of Robert's death, and she'd pushed her concerns aside, trusting Morrison's expertise. Present, 6/17/45. Now, as Max led her deeper into the NICU, Sarah's phone buzzed with a series of text messages that made her blood run cold. Baby Thompson, transferred to private placement, March 18th. Baby Rodriguez, transferred to private placement, April 2nd. Baby Chen, transferred to private placement, May 15th. Someone was sending her a list, and the pattern was unmistakable. Healthy babies entering the system, rapid private placements, and Dr. Morrison's personal involvement in every case. Max stopped outside room 314, his body going rigid with alertness. Through the small window, Sarah could see Emma lying in an isolette, tiny sensors monitoring her vital signs. But what made Sarah's knees nearly buckle was the sight of official-looking documents spread across the nearby desk, transfer papers bearing today's date and Morrison's signature. The door was locked, but Max's military training had apparently included more than basic protection work. He positioned himself at the door handle and applied pressure in exactly the right spot, causing the electronic lock to disengage with a soft click. "Good boy," Sarah breathed, slipping into the room behind him. Emma stirred as they approached, her tiny fist closing around Sarah's finger with surprising strength. The star-shaped birthmark on her wrist seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights, a genetic signature linking her forever to the father who died believing she was lost. September 2022. Bill's final letter. Another memory surfaced as Sarah studied Emma's peaceful face. Among Bill Whitmore's personal effects had been an unfinished letter to his daughter, words he'd been writing during his final leave before the training accident that claimed his life. "Dear Emma, by the time you read this, you'll be old enough to understand why Daddy had to go away so much. But I want you to know that every star I saw in the desert sky reminded me of the mark we share, the constellation that connects us across any distance. Max will take care of you if something happens to me. He's the best soldier I know, and he loves you already, even though you're still growing inside Mommy." The letter had never been finished. Bill had died before he could tell Emma about the family legacy of service, about the grandfather who'd served in Vietnam and the great-grandfather who'd stormed the beaches of Normandy. He'd died before he could teach her to throw a baseball or ride a bicycle or stand for the national anthem with the pride of someone who understood its true cost. Present. 6/28/15. The sound of footsteps in the corridor snapped Sarah back to the present crisis. Through the window, she could see Dr. Morrison approaching with the same two security guards, their expressions grim with purpose. Max's protective instincts activated immediately. He positioned himself between Sarah and the door, his military bearing transforming him from companion to guardian in the space of a heartbeat. Sarah's phone rang. Sergeant Martinez again. "Ms. Henderson, you need to come down to the lobby immediately. Dr. Morrison has informed us that you've taken a patient without authorization. This is becoming a serious legal matter." "Sergeant," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I'm a registered nurse with 15 years of experience. I don't take patients anywhere. I care for them. And right now I'm caring for a baby whose life may be in danger." "Ma'am, Dr. Morrison has provided documentation showing that you've been under significant stress lately. The best thing you can do right now is accept the help we're offering." Through the window, Sarah watched Morrison arguing with the security guards, gesturing emphatically toward room 314. The guards looked uncomfortable, clearly reluctant to forcibly remove a veteran nurse from a patient's room, but Morrison's authority as a physician gave her significant leverage. Sarah's mind raced through the evidence she'd gathered. Emma's false death certificate, the pattern of suspicious private placements, the $50,000 payments to Blessed Beginnings Family Services. But without official backing, without someone in authority willing to listen, all her evidence meant nothing. That's when Max made a decision that changed everything. The German Shepherd padded to the room's computer terminal and began pawing at the keyboard with surgical precision. His military training had apparently included basic technology work, because within moments, he'd managed to access Morrison's private files. "Max, you brilliant boy," Sarah whispered, watching in amazement as the dog's actions revealed folder after folder of incriminating evidence. The files painted a picture of systematic corruption that took Sarah's breath away. Blessed Beginnings. Family Services wasn't just an adoption agency. It was a front operation that specialized in providing healthy infants to wealthy clients willing to pay premium prices for designer babies with specific characteristics. Babies were selected based on their parents' genetics, military service records, educational backgrounds, and physical attributes. Emma Whitmore, as the daughter of a decorated soldier and a nurse who died in childbirth, represented exactly the kind of premium placement that commanded top dollar. But the most horrifying discovery was a communication thread between Morrison and the agency's director. "The Whitmore baby is perfect for the Colorado placement. Military father, deceased. Medical professional mother, deceased. Excellent genetics. No living relatives to complicate placement. Client is offering $75K for expedited processing." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat as she realized the depth of Morrison's betrayal. Not only had she falsified Emma's death certificate, she'd actively suppressed any information about Bill's attempts to locate his daughter, ensuring that Emma would appear to be a perfect orphan with no one to claim her. 6:35:41. The door burst open as Morrison and the security guards finally gained access to the room. Morrison's face was flushed with anger and desperation, her usual professional composure completely shattered. "Sarah, step away from that computer immediately," Morrison commanded. "You're interfering with confidential medical records, and you're putting this infant at risk with your unstable behavior." Max moved between Morrison and Sarah, his low growl carrying the unmistakable threat of a military working dog pushed beyond his limits. "Pat," Sarah said quietly, not moving from the computer screen, "I know what you've been doing. I know about Blessed Beginnings, about the babies you've sold, about the families you've destroyed." Morrison's laugh sounded brittle, desperate. "You don't understand the complexities of modern adoption, Sarah. These children are going to loving homes, wealthy families who can provide opportunities." "Emma has family," Sarah interrupted. "She has a grandmother who's been searching for her, a legacy of service and sacrifice that you stole from her. You let Bill Whitmore die believing his daughter was beyond his reach when she was right here, waiting for someone to care enough to look." The security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah could see doubt creeping into their expressions as they processed the implications of what they were hearing. "Ma'am," one of them said to Morrison, "maybe we should slow down here, get some supervisors involved." "There's no time," Morrison snapped. "The transport arrives in less than 4 hours, and if this infant isn't ready for placement—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd revealed too much. The security guards' expressions hardened as they understood they were being asked to facilitate something far more serious than managing a distressed employee. The clock read 6:42:18 as Sarah made the most important decision of her career. She picked up Emma, cradling the tiny girl against her chest, and looked directly into Morrison's eyes. "Not on my watch," she said firmly. "Not in my hospital. Not to Bill Whitmore's daughter." Max stepped forward, his amber eyes locked on Morrison with the focused intensity of a soldier identifying a threat. The battle for Emma's soul was about to begin. The clock read 6:45:33 when Sarah's world collapsed into a nightmare of bureaucratic horror and moral bankruptcy that would have made Kafka weep. The computer screen before her displayed 12 separate files, each representing a healthy infant who had supposedly died under Dr. Morrison's care, only to be quietly transferred to Blessed Beginnings Family Services for private placement. 12 babies. 12 families destroyed by lies. 12 children sold to the highest bidder like livestock at auction. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the evidence, each document revealing another layer of systematic corruption that reached deep into the heart of the institution she'd served faithfully for 15 years. Baby Thompson, who'd supposedly died of SIADS, had actually been placed with a tech mogul in Silicon Valley for $85,000. Baby Rodriguez, listed as a stillbirth, was living with oil executives in Texas who'd paid $90,000 for a premium Hispanic placement. "I signed some of these death certificates," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the electronic beeping of Emma's monitors. "Dear God, I signed papers saying these babies were dead when they were being sold like commodities." The psychological horror of her unwitting complicity hit her like a physical blow. For months, she'd been the unknowing instrument of Morrison's operation, her signature legitimizing the theft of children from families who would never know their babies had survived. Max pressed against her legs, offering silent support as Sarah confronted the magnitude of the deception. His amber eyes reflected an intelligence that seemed almost human, the understanding of a soldier who'd witnessed the worst of human nature and still chose to fight for what was right. "Doctor." Morrison stepped closer, her professional mask finally slipping to reveal something cold and calculating beneath. "Sarah, you're having a breakdown. This stress, these wild theories, you need help before you hurt someone." "The only person hurting anyone in this room is you," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. She turned the computer screen toward the security guards, watching their expressions change as they processed the evidence. "Look at this. Look at what she's been doing to these families." The older security guard, Walt Thompson, leaned forward to read the screen. His weathered face, marked by years of military service, hardened as he recognized the pattern of corruption. "Ma'am," he said to Morrison, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd served his country, "these documents show payments of $50,000 to $90,000 per infant." "That's not adoption. That's human trafficking." Morrison's composure cracked like thin ice under pressure. "You don't understand the complexities of modern pediatric care, Walt. These infants had special needs, required specialized placement." "Bull," Walt interrupted, his Kansas drawl carrying the weight of decades of calling out lies. "I've got grandchildren, Dr. Morrison. I know the difference between helping babies and selling them." The younger guard, Marcus, looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Doc, maybe we should call the state police. Get some officials down here to sort this out proper." "There's no time for that," Morrison snapped, checking her watch with obvious panic. "The transport arrives at noon, and this infant needs to be prepared for transfer. If we delay this placement, the family will withdraw their offer, and then what happens to her?" Sarah felt Emma stir in her arms, the tiny girl's fingers grasping at the fabric of her scrubs with instinctive trust. The star-shaped birthmark on Emma's wrist caught the harsh fluorescent light, a genetic signature linking her to a father who'd died believing his daughter was lost forever. "What happens to her is she goes to her real family," Sarah said firmly. "Emma has a grandmother who's been searching for her for months. She has a legacy of service and sacrifice that you tried to steal from her." Morrison's laugh carried a note of hysteria. "Eleanor Whitmore is 78 years old and living on Social Security. What kind of opportunities can she provide compared to a family with unlimited resources? Private schools, college funds, international travel?" "Love," Sarah interrupted. "She can provide love, family history, and the knowledge of who Emma's father was. She can tell Emma about Bill's service to his country, about the sacrifices he made, about the constellation he tattooed on his arm so his daughter would know they shared something special." Max's ears perked up at the mention of Bill's name, his tail giving a slight wag that seemed to say he remembered the man who'd loved him, The soldier who'd promised to take care of his daughter no matter what. The clock read 7:15 as Morrison's desperation reached a breaking point. She pulled out her cell phone and made a call that chilled Sarah's blood. "Security, this is Dr. Morrison. I need additional personnel in NICU room 314 immediately. We have a situation involving an unstable employee who's threatening patient safety." Within minutes, the sound of multiple footsteps echoed through the corridor. Sarah watched through the window as half a dozen security guards approached, led by the hospital's chief administrator, David Kellerman. "Sarah," Kellerman's voice carried false concern as he entered the room. "Dr. Morrison has informed me that you're experiencing some kind of crisis. We're here to help you through this difficult time." Sarah looked around the room at the faces surrounding her. Morrison's cold calculation, Kellerman's bureaucratic blindness, the new guard's professional detachment. Only Walt Thompson showed any sign of moral awareness, his military bearing rigid with the tension of a man watching injustice unfold. "David," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the crushing weight of institutional betrayal. "Look at these files. Look at the evidence of what's been happening in our hospital. Babies have been sold, families destroyed, all under the guise of medical care." Kellerman glanced at the computer screen with the dismissive attitude of an administrator who'd learned to prioritize liability over truth. "Sarah, these appear to be legitimate medical records and adoption procedures. Dr. Morrison has explained that you've been under significant stress. The stress of discovering that my hospital has been used as a front for child trafficking," Sarah interrupted. "The stress of realizing that I unknowingly participated in the systematic theft of children from their families." Morrison stepped forward, her professional authority reasserting itself. "Mr. Kellerman, Ms. Henderson has clearly suffered some kind of psychological break. She's taken an infant from the NICU without authorization and is making wild accusations based on her misinterpretation of confidential medical records." The walls seemed to close in around Sarah as she realized the full scope of the conspiracy she was facing. This wasn't just Morrison's personal corruption. It was an institutional system that protected its own interests above all else, even the welfare of the children it was supposed to serve. Emma began to cry, her tiny voice cutting through the adult conversation like a knife through flesh. The sound seemed to affect everyone in the room differently. Morrison looked annoyed. Kellerman appeared uncomfortable, but Walt Thompson's expression softened with grandfatherly concern. Max's reaction was the most profound. The German Shepherd's military training dissolved into pure protective instinct as he heard the baby's distress. He moved to Sarah's side and let out a low whine that spoke of loss, loyalty, and the sacred duty to protect the innocent. "That dog needs to be removed immediately," Morrison declared. "It's a health hazard and a liability risk." "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Max stays. He's the only one in this room who understands what real loyalty means." The clock read 7:15:22 as the situation reached its breaking point. Morrison nodded to the security guards, and Sarah realized they were preparing to forcibly separate her from Emma. "Ma'am," one of the new guards said apologetically, "you need to put the baby down and come with us. We don't want anyone to get hurt here." Sarah looked down at Emma's face, seeing Bill Whitmore's eyes staring back at her with innocent trust. She thought about the letter Bill had never finished, the promises he'd never been able to keep, the love he'd never been able to share with his daughter. "Some things are worth losing everything for," she said quietly, echoing the words her grandmother had taught her decades ago. Max positioned himself between Sarah and the approaching guards, his military bearing transforming him from pet to protector. His amber eyes held the same determination Sarah had seen in countless soldiers over the years, the look of someone prepared to sacrifice everything for a cause greater than themselves. "I won't let you sell Bill Whitmore's daughter," Sarah declared, her voice carrying across the room with unexpected authority. "I won't let you destroy another family with your lies and greed." Morrison's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath her professional exterior. "You're finished, Sarah. Your career, your reputation, your entire life. It's all over. And for what? A baby who'll be better off with people who can actually provide for her?" The clock read 7:25:41 as Sarah faced the most important decision of her life. In her arms, Emma represented everything she'd failed to protect over the past months, the innocent victims of a system that valued profit over people, convenience over conscience. But Emma also represented hope, the chance to keep one promise, to honor one fallen soldier's memory, to prove that some bonds couldn't be broken by bureaucracy or corruption. "Bobby," she whispered, speaking to her dead husband across the years, "if you're watching, help me save this little angel." Max's tail wagged once, firmly, as if he'd heard her prayer and approved. The battle for Emma's soul was about to reach its climax. The clock read 7:30:18 when the automatic doors of the NICU burst open with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of Heartland Memorial Hospital. Through the entrance walked a woman whose presence commanded immediate attention, not through size or volume, but through the unmistakable dignity of someone who had survived every tragedy life could throw at her and emerged stronger. Eleanor Ellie Whitmore stood barely 5 feet tall, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her weathered hands gripping a worn leather purse that had seen decades of use. At 78, she moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had aged, but whose spirit remained unbroken. Her blue eyes, so similar to the ones Sarah remembered from Bill's final hours, swept the room with the sharp intelligence of a woman who had raised 6 children, buried a husband, and watched her youngest son die in service to his country. "I'm looking for my granddaughter," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent a lifetime getting things done. "Emma Grace Whitmore, and I believe you have her." The room fell silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment and Emma's gentle breathing. Sarah felt her heart stop as she realized she was looking at the family Bill had died believing was lost forever. Max's reaction was immediate and profound. The German shepherd's entire body began trembling with recognition and joy. His tail wagged with such intensity that his whole frame shook, and he let out a series of soft whines that spoke of months of grief and longing finally finding their resolution. "Max," Eleanor whispered, her stern expression cracking as she saw the dog who had shared her son's final years. "Oh, my beautiful boy, look at you. You've been searching for her, haven't you?" "You've been trying to keep Bill's promise all this time." The reunion between Eleanor and Max was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The elderly woman knelt with difficulty, her arthritic joints protesting, but her determination unwavering. Max approached slowly, almost reverently, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. When Eleanor's weathered hands touched his scarred muzzle, both of them began to cry, Eleanor with tears that spoke of loss and hope intertwined, Max with the soft whimpers of a soldier finally allowed to come home. "He told me about you," Eleanor said to Max, her voice thick with emotion. "In his letters, he wrote about how you would protect Emma, how you understood that she was special. I never stopped believing, not even when they told me she was gone." Dr. Morrison stepped forward, her professional composure reasserting itself despite the emotional scene unfolding before her. "Ma'am, I'm Dr. Morrison, and I'm afraid there's been some confusion." The infant in question is a foundling with no known family. She's been properly processed through our adoption procedures. "Stop," Eleanor interrupted, her voice cutting through Morrison's explanation like a blade through silk. "I've been searching for my granddaughter for 4 months. I've talked to every social worker, every administrator, every official who would listen. They all told me the same lie, that Emma had died during birth complications." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder of documents. Birth certificate showing Emma as Bill's daughter. Jessica's death certificate from childbirth complications. Bill's military records showing Emma as his next of kin. DNA test results from the lab in Omaha proving that I am Emma's biological grandmother. Sarah watched Morrison's face drain of color as Eleanor continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. I hired a private investigator when the official channels failed me. Cost me most of my savings, but I learned about Blessed Beginnings Family Services. I learned about their special arrangements with certain hospitals. I learned about healthy babies being reported as deceased when they were actually being sold to wealthy families. The security guards exchanged uncomfortable glances, the moral implications of their situation becoming increasingly clear. Walt Thompson stepped forward, his military bearing evident as he addressed Eleanor with the respect due to a Gold Star mother. "Ma'am, you said you have DNA evidence?" Eleanor nodded, producing a laboratory report that bore the official seal of the Nebraska State Crime Lab. 99.7% probability that I am the biological grandmother of the infant currently in this hospital. The test was conducted using genetic material from Bill's personal effects and compared to DNA samples I provided. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah felt the weight of truth settling over the room like a heavy blanket, suffocating the lies and deceptions that had held Emma captive for months. Morrison's desperation reached a breaking point. She pulled out her cell phone and began dialing frantically. "I'm calling hospital administration. This woman is interfering with a legal adoption process. The Blessed Beginnings placement has been approved through proper channels." "Proper channels?" Eleanor's voice rose with a righteous anger that made everyone in the room take notice. "You filed a false death certificate for my granddaughter. You told my dying son that his baby was beyond his reach when she was alive and healthy. You systematically destroyed families by stealing their children and selling them to the highest bidder." Eleanor's indignation was magnificent to behold. This was a woman who had raised children during the Great Depression, who had sent her husband to World War II and watched him come home broken, who had buried 4 children and still found the strength to love the ones who remained. "I may be old," Eleanor continued, her voice carrying the accumulated power of 8 decades of experience. "But I am not powerless. I have contacted the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and the Nebraska Department of Health and Human Services. They are all very interested in the activities of Blessed Beginnings and their hospital partnerships." The clock read 7:45:33 as the full scope of Eleanor's preparation became clear. This wasn't a desperate grandmother making wild accusations. This was a strategic campaign conducted by someone who understood how to fight institutional corruption. Morrison's phone call was answered, but instead of the support she expected, Sarah could hear the panic in the administrator's voice on the other end. "Doctor Morrison, we need to talk immediately. The FBI is here with search warrants. They're asking about adoption records and financial transactions." The phone slipped from Morrison's nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. Eleanor looked around the room at the faces of the people who had participated in her granddaughter's abduction, some knowingly, some through willful ignorance, but all complicit in the systematic destruction of families. "I want to hold my granddaughter," she said simply. "I want to keep the promise I made to my son as he lay dying. I want to tell Emma about her father, about the constellation he shared with her, about the love that brought her into this world, despite all the pain and loss." Sarah looked down at Emma, who had been sleeping peacefully through the adult drama surrounding her. The tiny girl's face was serene, unmarked by the corruption that had threatened to steal her future. The star-shaped birthmark on her wrist seemed to glow in the harsh hospital lighting, a genetic signature that connected her to generations of service and sacrifice. "It ain't over till it's over," Sarah said softly, repeating one of her grandmother's favorite expressions. She looked up at Eleanor, seeing in the older woman's eyes the same determination that had driven Max to search for Emma despite months of rejection and hardship. Slowly, reverently, Sarah placed Emma in Eleanor's waiting arms. The moment their skin touched, Emma's eyes opened for the first time since arriving at the hospital. The infant's gaze fixed on Eleanor's face with the mysterious recognition that sometimes occurs between family members, even those meeting for the first time. "Hello, sweetheart," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm your Grandma Ellie. I've been looking for you for so long." "Your daddy loved you so much, and he's watching over us right now." Max positioned himself beside Eleanor's chair, his protective instincts finally at peace. The three generations, Eleanor, Emma, and the dog who had served as the bridge between them, formed a tableau of love and loyalty that made even the hardest hearts in the room soften with recognition of something sacred. The clock read 8:15 as the sound of approaching sirens filled the air outside. Justice was coming to Heartland Memorial Hospital, carried on the wings of an elderly woman's determination and a dog's unshakable loyalty. But for the first time in months, Emma Grace Whitmore was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of family who would never let her go. The clock read 8:44 when the FBI task force swept through Heartland Memorial Hospital like a prairie storm, their presence transforming the sterile corridors into a crime scene that would make national headlines within hours. Special Agent Rebecca Martinez led the team with the methodical precision of someone who had spent 15 years dismantling human trafficking operations across the Midwest. "Ma'am," Agent Martinez said to Eleanor, her voice carrying both respect and urgency, "we've been investigating Blessed Beginnings Family Services for 8 months. Your grandson's case broke this wide open for us." Eleanor looked up from Emma, who was sleeping peacefully in her grandmother's arms for the first time in her short life. "My grandson?" "Your grandson, Tommy, Eleanor's oldest son's boy, contacted us 6 months ago. He'd been tracking financial irregularities in adoption agencies as part of his work with the Treasury Department. When he started investigating his nephew Bill's case, he uncovered a network that spans 7 states. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized Eleanor hadn't been fighting this battle alone. The Whitmore family had military precision in their blood, and they'd been systematically building a case that would bring down the entire operation. Max pressed closer to Eleanor's chair, his amber eyes never leaving Emma's face. The German shepherd's vigil was finally over, but his protective instincts remained sharp. He'd found his purpose again, not just as a soldier's companion, but as a family guardian. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of activity that felt like watching justice unfold in real time. Dr. Morrison was led away in handcuffs, her professional facade crumbling as she faced federal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and child trafficking. David Kellerman, the hospital administrator, followed shortly after, his bureaucratic cowardice unable to protect him from the consequences of willful blindness. 12 babies, Agent Martinez explained to the assembled staff. 12 healthy infants reported as deceased, then sold through private adoption networks for prices ranging from $50,000 to $90,000 each. The total operation generated over $800,000 in illegal profits. Walt Thompson, the security guard whose military background had helped him recognize the corruption, was asked to stay and provide testimony. His weathered face showed the satisfaction of a man who'd finally been able to serve his country again, this time by protecting innocent children instead of foreign battlefields. "My daddy always said you judge a man not by how he falls, but by how he gets back up," Walt told Sarah as they watched the FBI agents process evidence. "Looks like this hospital's got some getting up to do." By 10:30 a.m., the immediate crisis had passed, but the emotional healing was just beginning. Eleanor sat in the NICU's family room, Emma cradled against her chest while Max lay at her feet like a furry guardian angel. Sarah had pulled up a chair beside them, still processing the magnitude of what had unfolded. "Tell me about Bill," Sarah said softly. "Tell me about the man who died believing his daughter was lost forever." Eleanor's eyes took on the distant look of someone accessing precious memories. "Billy was my youngest, born when I was already 42 and thought my childbearing days were over. He was stubborn as a mule and twice as loyal. When he decided to join the army,
I knew it was because he wanted to make a difference in the world. She stroked Emma's tiny hand, her weathered fingers gentle against the infant's soft skin. He met Jessica at a VA hospital where she was working as a nurse. She was treating his friend who'd been wounded in Afghanistan. Billy said he knew he was going to marry her the moment he saw her caring for that broken soldier with such tenderness. Max's tail thumped softly against the floor, as if he remembered Jessica and approved of Eleanor's memories. They had 18 months together before Jessica got pregnant. Billy was deployed when Emma was born, but he video-called from Kandahar every day, singing lullabies to a baby he'd never held. Eleanor's voice caught with emotion. Jessica died from complications 3 days after Emma was born. Billy was granted emergency leave, but by the time he got home, the state had already placed Emma in foster care. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she understood the full tragedy of Bill's story. He spent his final leave trying to get her back. 6 weeks of fighting bureaucracy, filling out forms, attending hearings, proving he was a fit father despite his PTSD and deployment schedule. He'd finally gotten approval to bring Emma home when he had to report back for training. The accident happened 2 days before Emma was supposed to be released to his custody. The cruel irony was devastating. Bill Whitmore had died believing he'd failed his daughter, never knowing that she was alive and waiting for the family reunion that would never come. But Max knew, Eleanor continued, her hand finding the dog's scarred head. Somehow, he knew Emma was still out there. Dogs have senses we don't understand, connections that go deeper than human logic. As if summoned by the sound of his name, Max rose and padded to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. His ears perked forward with alert attention, and his tail began wagging with increasing enthusiasm. "What is it, boy?" Eleanor asked. Through the window, Sarah could see a convoy of vehicles pulling into the parking lot: FBI vans, state police cars, and news trucks from 3 different television stations. But Max's attention was focused on a specific car, a blue Honda Accord that had just parked near the main entrance. A young man in army dress uniform emerged from the Honda, his bearing unmistakably military, despite his obvious emotional distress. He looked up at the hospital windows as if trying to pinpoint their exact location. "That's Tommy," Eleanor breathed. "Bill's nephew. He's been coordinating with the FBI from Fort Riley." The reunion in the hospital lobby 20 minutes later was everything Sarah had hoped to witness, but had been afraid to believe possible. Tommy Whitmore, a staff sergeant in his own right, embraced his grandmother with the fierce love of a soldier who understood the true cost of family. "Grandma Ellie," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You brought her home. We all did it, son. Me and Max and that brave nurse Sarah and even this little angel herself. Sometimes it takes a whole army to win the important battles." The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, social workers who apologized for their failures, hospital staff who wanted to express their support, and FBI agents who needed to document every detail of Emma's case for the upcoming trials. But the most meaningful moment came at 4:30 p.m., when Agent Martinez presented Eleanor with official custody documents that legally recognized her as Emma's guardian. "These papers make it official," Martinez explained, "but from what I've seen today, this little girl was always yours. Blood doesn't lie, and neither does love." Eleanor looked down at Emma, who had slept peacefully through most of the day's chaos, waking only to eat and to study her grandmother's face with the intense curiosity of a child discovering her place in the world. "Billy," Eleanor whispered, speaking to her son across the veil between life and death. "Your baby girl is safe. She's home where she belongs, and she's going to know everything about her daddy, his courage, his loyalty, his love for his country, and his family." Max lifted his head from where he'd been dozing beside Eleanor's chair, as if he too could sense Bill's presence in the room. For a moment,
The German Shepherd's amber eyes seemed to look beyond the physical world, seeing something the humans couldn't perceive. Then he settled back down with a contented sigh, his mission finally complete. 3 months later, Eleanor's farmhouse outside Cedar Ridge had been transformed into exactly the kind of home Bill Whitmore had dreamed of providing for his daughter. The old Victorian house, which had seemed too large and too quiet for one elderly woman, now rang with the sounds of new life. Emma's gentle coos, Max's protective barks, and Eleanor's voice singing the same lullabies she'd sung to her own children decades earlier. Sarah visited every Sunday after church, bringing groceries and staying for dinner. She'd found her purpose again in caring for the family that had brought meaning back to her life. The hospital had offered her a promotion and a substantial raise, their way of acknowledging her heroism. But Sarah had negotiated for something more valuable, the freedom to spend time with the people who mattered most. On this particular Sunday evening, as autumn painted the Nebraska landscape in shades of gold and crimson, Eleanor sat on her front porch swing with Emma in her arms and Max at her feet. Sarah had just finished cleaning up from dinner, and Tommy was splitting wood for the winter, his leave time allowing him to help prepare his grandmother's home for the cold months ahead. "Sometimes the good Lord sends angels when you need them most," Eleanor said, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. "And sometimes those angels have 4 legs and a warrior's heart." Max's tail thumped against the porch boards, a sound of contentment that spoke of a soldier finally at peace. In her arms, Emma stirred and opened her eyes, looking up at her grandmother with the clear blue gaze she'd inherited from the Whitmore family. On her tiny wrist, the star-shaped birthmark caught the last rays of sunlight, a genetic signature that connected her to generations of service and sacrifice. "Love always finds a way," Sarah added softly, settling into the chair beside the swing. "Sometimes it just takes a miracle to bring everyone home. Sometimes life teaches us that the most powerful love stories aren't found in Hollywood movies. They're discovered in the quiet courage of everyday heroes who refuse to give up on family." Max, a battle-scarred German shepherd, spent 14 months searching the streets for a promise he couldn't abandon. Sarah, a veteran nurse, risked everything she'd built over 15 years to protect one innocent child. And Eleanor, a 78-year-old grandmother, fought an entire corrupt system to bring her granddaughter home. Their story reminds us that real heroes don't wear capes. They wear fur, scrubs, and the determined spirit of those who've lived long enough to know what truly matters. In our golden years, we understand that family isn't just about blood. It's about the bonds we choose to honor, the promises we refuse to break, and the love that transcends even death itself. Like Max's unwavering loyalty to his fallen soldier, like Sarah's courage to stand against corruption, like Eleanor's relentless fight for justice, we all have the power to be someone's miracle. The question isn't whether angels exist, it's whether we're brave enough to recognize them when they appear, sometimes with 4 legs and a warrior's heart, ready to remind us that love always finds a way home. Questions for our community. Have you ever had a loyal companion, whether human or animal, who taught you the true meaning of unconditional love? What moment in your life required you to show the same courage as Sarah, Max, or Eleanor? Share your stories below. We'd love to hear how love found its way in your own life.